Hi everyone, Dustin here, ATEM Off-Road. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are all having a good day. In this video series, we're finally getting back to restoring my daughter's 1990 Jeep Cherokee XJ that we are really super excited to get going for her. So the scope for this build is going to make this Jeep as adventure ready as possible, all while making sure that it's reliable and it has good on and off-road characteristics. This Jeep has only about 160,000 miles and it's just really starting to get broken in, but over time things start to wear out, and just to make sure that things are reliable and working for her, I've got a list of things that I usually go over whenever I buy a used vehicle. So that's going to be sharing with you in this video. This vehicle is going to need a smog here in a couple months. We'll probably get it soon after I get everything on the engine and transmission really all sorted out. I personally like my vehicles in good running order, and I want the least amount of troubles when I'm out there camping and all that with my family. So more maintenance at home, less on our adventures, and that's the idea. So let's get to it. Whenever I look under the hood of a vehicle, I can usually judge how well that vehicle has been maintained by the cleanliness of the engine bay. For the most part, everything looks to be intact, and I don't really see anything that's been hacked or poorly put together or repaired. At this point, my biggest concern was finding rust in some of the areas of the cooling system, which I suspect the previous owner used tap water other than coolant, which keeps the cooling system lubricated and rust-free. We started off by making sure everything was sealed where we don't want water, and sprayed everything down with some degreaser, and eventually got to pressure washing, and we thought it came out pretty good. And with the engine nice and clean, we continued working on the cooling system, removing the upper radiator support, upper and lower hose, and disconnecting the transmission lines, removing the radiator. I also removed the serpentine belt, as we're going to come back to replacing the crank pulley here in a moment. The radiator never leaked when I got the vehicle, but it was full of debris, so I cleaned it inside and out, starting with vacuuming it and then washing it down and rinsing it out really well with a garden hose, and then blowing it out with compressed air. Since I was there, I went ahead and washed down the AC condenser as well and blew it out with compressed air. Cleaning these radiators should promote good airflow and help reject any heat. So this will actually leave you stranded on this Jeep. These Jeeps came with a two-piece crank pulley, and if you look at it closely, this one was starting to separate from the inner to the outer piece. It's got this rubber bushing or isolator bushing that you want to make sure is not cracking or separating. And since I'm here, I've got the radiator out. We'll go ahead and swap this out with a new one, and we'll need a puller to do that. I'll show you guys my puller right here, and we'll use this to take the old one off and the new one on. So to crack this bolt loose, I've got my chain holder, basically a chain wrench, and a 3/4 or 19mm socket, and then I just broke it loose, and then the bolt will come out and the washer. And now we can set up our puller. This is the harmonic balancer crank pulley that I picked up on Amazon for about 40 bucks. And then on the back, I just put some grease where the seal goes over. And then I used this thinner washer just to get some threads on the end of the crank to start the installation process. Then I took the bolt back off, put the original washer, and torqued that bolt to 80 foot-pounds. You can see here I've got a wrench running through the hole of the balancer to kind of hold it in place while I give it a torque. With that out of the way, we moved on to removing the upper thermostat housing to assess how much surface rust is inside the block and on these components. And as you can see, there is no thermostat present on this engine, which is terrible. So we're going to have to clean up all of the surface rust and get a new thermostat installed. This abrasive wire attachment for my drill worked out pretty good at getting all the surface rust removed very quickly. I think that area cleaned up pretty good on the engine block, as well as cleaning up the thermostat housing. I flushed the block really good, and I was pretty impressed with the way everything cleaned up. And I'm confident once we get the coolant back into the cooling system, it'll definitely slow down any rust from coming back. I'll be installing a 190-degree thermostat with new gaskets and silicone, and we should be good. Now, before we finish up the cooling system, since I'm already here and things are taken apart, I might as well replace and upgrade the alternator to 100 amps. Now, I'll probably come back and replace this bearing here sometime or another, but other than that, alternator needs to be replaced. After checking all the pulleys, I noticed the alternators was pretty rough, so I'm glad I was able to get this in there in the time that we did, and then we could install the radiator. Now, on these Jeep Cherokees back in the late 80s, early 90s, they had what we called a closed loop cooling system with a pressurized coolant expansion tank. Now, in modern days, we have what we call an open closed cooling system with a non-pressurized recovery tank and a radiator cap. So early in the video, when you guys saw me remove the coolant reservoir, that was actually a pressurized coolant reservoir, which we're going to be getting away with and going to a more modern setup. So I have a couple options. I could either replace the radiator with a capped radiator, or I can add a cap inline to the upper radiator hose myself, and I think that's what I'm going to end up doing. Now, the inline radiator cap that I found on Amazon matched the same diameter as the inlet tube on the radiator. I purchased some new upper and lower radiator hoses, and now I'm going to cut this one to fit up the radiator cap. Now all I have to do is install the hoses as if we would normally and top off the cooling system. Now, the biggest takeaway for this style of cooling system is that as the engine warms up, that coolant is expanding and there's going to be pressure in the system that is then released by the radiator cap and then overflowed or recovered in the recovery tank. As that engine cools down, that coolant is contracting and creates a vacuum on this valve, reintroducing the coolant back into the system. I particularly like this idea, as if there's air trapped into the closed loop system, it will push that air out and escape into this recovery tank, whereas it won't let any air back into the system. The cooling system is naturally safer because the recovery tank is non-pressurized, so all you have to do is look at the levels and top off as necessary. For the recovery coolant tank, all I did was add one of the hoses this tank came with to the nipple here on the radiator cap housing, and then this is the overflow. It just goes off to the side down to the ground. And then the bracket for the bottle, where the bottle just drops in, I had 2 screws that came with this kit, and I just drilled some pilot holes and drove the screws down with some washers, and that's pretty secure. So that completes the cooling system, and I'm pretty happy with the setup so far. Now, as I've been sorting through the various systems on this Jeep, I noticed the vacuum, electrical, and fuels all needed attention. After getting the Jeep pressure washed and cleaned, I noticed there was quite a few vacuum leaks. On this Jeep, it has a front and rear vacuum harness. They're fairly cheap, about 30 bucks a piece, and it was just a no-brainer. Get the vacuum lines and the harnesses all installed and put it to sleep. Now, a really awesome feature on this Jeep is if you locate this vacuum diagram schematic on the firewall, it literally shows you where every connection goes for the front and rear harness. And then all you have to do is make each connection as you go. The next system here is electrical, as it definitely needed some attention. So I unbolted the battery's main cables. These cables go from the battery to the starter, and the starter to the distribution block, as well as the grounds for the engine block to the battery. All of the insulation is just breaking down, falling apart, and we just don't want that for heavy conductors. This could cause a fire and potentially cause us to be stranded on the side of the road. So the plan is to get these cables all laid out so we can get an idea how much cable we'll need, and this will be great for our Big 7 cable upgrade. We've got some new connectors, end connectors, really nice lugs. I've got an end crimper anytime you work with heavy cables, you want to crimp your ends on. And I've also got some military style clamps for when I change up the battery. Right now we're just running a side post, but if I go to a top post, we'll go ahead and use those. So overall, I think this is going to be pretty straightforward. We'll start measuring lengths and cutting cable. 3/8 and 5/16 holes. And that's going to be perfect for this build out. We're going to go ahead and cut our insulation. This is high temp PVC insulation that we're going to be using. We'll also shield this with some conduit. That way none of the insulation is affected by the heat. Just going to use a razor blade and cut back just enough to where the crimped end will fit over the conductor. It's about right here. And we'll just make sure the conductor is square to the crimped end. Pull that off and check our fitment here. We'll just crimp this end. Just get a nice crimp on it. Okay. All right, that's actually pretty tight. I'm gonna go ahead and do that again up the shoulder of the connector. And there you have it, a nice solid crimped connection. Then we'll take my heat gun here and we'll shrink the shrink tube over that crimped connection. All right, so I've got the new cables made up over here. This one is your battery to starter and then battery to power distribution block. This one is ground from battery to the engine block. And this one is gonna be battery to the front radiator support. And this one I made up for the engine block to the back firewall as an additional grounding strap. I'll show you guys that here in a minute, but that's going to be at the firewall. And then these are just the old cables we're replacing. So yep, pretty decent upgrade. Let's get it installed. All right, so right here there was a bracket with a 13mm head bolt that was on the side of the engine block. So I've made it the first one. We're going to go ahead and bolt that up to the block. It's just to the right of the actual stud for all of the grounds, the bundle of grounds to the block. And then it's gonna, the other side is gonna go right here on the firewall where I kind of removed the paint on this stud here, but I'm using a 10mm socket to tighten up the bolt. Brake cleaner, just get those cleaned up really good. Get the stud cleaned up really good. Everything just really clean for your connection points. We'll go ahead and bolt in our heavy lug. All right, so I've got the battery connections. Here's the ground to firewall and then the other ground here. Just have it going to the block where the dipstick tube is for the bundle of grounds. And then two off of the positive side to the starter. This is the main one. I've got it covered in conduit. It goes all the way down to the starter solenoid, and then this one right here goes to the power distribution block. So really heavy there. The last one I need to make, which would make the 7, is from the alternator up to the distribution block. I just haven't had time to do it because I want to do a fuse for that. But that will definitely complete the big 7 upgrade once I get that done. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the setup. Now, I've been working on and off this Jeep for the last couple of months doing these upgrades, and in the last video we had some issues with the fuel system where the pump wouldn't fire up or allow enough pressure at the fuel rail. So I went and took a DeWalt battery and just kind of jumped it, gave it a boost, and we got pressure again. Well, this time around it's a little bit different, and I'll kind of share with you the troubleshooting techniques I take when it comes to the fuel system and getting that all repaired. And I know we have good spark and we have fuel at the rail, but I'm not sure about pressure. So I've got this pressure gauge. We're gonna go ahead and crank it over. Put the gauge up here so we can see it through the windshield, and I'll crank it over and see if we got pressure. What we got. So that is in the run position. And And that's the crank position. Just under 10 psi. So we'll go back to the run. So it sounds and looks like our relays and pumps, everything's working properly. We're just not getting the pressure to the rail we need. We should be getting somewhere around 39 to 30 psi at the rail, and we're barely getting 10. So I'm gonna go ahead and change out that fuel pump. Now, if your fuel pump still works, but it's just lacking pressure, here's a little tip and trick that I have tried in the past, and it's worked out pretty successfully. Now here I am just removing the Schrader valve from the fuel realm, and then I'm going to jump terminals 5 and 6 on the diagnostics ports to basically turn on the fuel pump and connect a hose to the outside of the vehicle where I can pump the fluid into this jerry can. Alright, so I've got the old pump and the new pump side by side, and I'm just checking the feedback units for the fuel gauge, just making sure they're not like really way out of whack. But with them both down, they do look relatively close. Close enough is good for me, so I'm going to get the new O-ring on the new pump and then we'll get it installed. Now is a good time to check the inside of your tank if it needs cleaning or rusted out. This vehicle's been sitting a while, and man, it's looking actually pretty good on the inside. I like this can because it dumps the fuel in there hella fast. Alright, so I'm going to add some of this stuff. It's Octane Booster. I usually add it a couple tanks before I go get the smog. And yeah, so this one's 3 times the boost. Kind of helps with older gas and just getting the new stuff with the old stuff. Alright, so as you can see, the pressure is jumping up all the way up to 40 at the rail, so that's good. We've restored pressure, and all it was just a weak pump. Alright, so we got rhythm and we've got good fuel pressure. I'm going to go ahead and warm up the engine. Got it warmed up already, and we're going to open up a vacuum port on the throttle body, and I'm going to drop about 1/3 or about 4 ounces of this can inside. We'll let that run off for about 10 minutes. I'll drop another 4 ounces in there, let it heat soak in with the engine off, and then we'll fire it back up and run it for another 10 minutes. So it's about a 30-minute procedure here using the Seafoam. Let's see how it works. Let's go ahead and put this vacuum line back on. First pass of Seafoam, and the engine sounding much better already at idle. Alright, engine's off. We're going to go ahead and drop another 4 ounces. And we'll let this heat soak into the throttle body for about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to be changing the oil, and we'll come back to start it up with fresh oil. I got the new filter in and the plug in the oil filter, so we'll see how far this goes. But this engine's definitely going to be happy with some fresh oil. Alright, so first start after the oil change to get the pressure up and the Seafoam hot soak. Sounds pretty good. See what we got here on the exhaust. Go ahead, rev it up. Rev it up. Oh yeah, we got to burn off all of that burnt oil. It's going to be smoking for a moment until all of that unburnt fuel is burnt off from the intake. A lot of it has to do with not running the thermostat for so long, and God knows how long they didn't run it without the thermostat. So we're going to drive it around the block a couple times and just check to make sure this coolant fan comes on. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not really sure when the last time these plugs were replaced, so we'll just see, get a little screenshot on what's going on. Okay, so a brownish color looks to be running just about right. It's kind of what you want it to look like anyway. There is some black, may have ran rich at one point, but overall The plug looks decent. This one is a NGK FR5. Looks to be the right plug as well for this engine. But as far as combustion and the gap, I think we're going to be fine. Plugs seem to be good, gapped properly, and indicate proper combustion. Now, another thing I like to check is the condition of the spark plug wires. Those look good as well. They're not cracking or fraying or like falling apart. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the spark plug wires as well. And I mean, it just makes no sense in buying these kinds of things if you're not having any issues with them. All right, so I've got the cap off and turned over, and I'm just looking underneath it, and I'm not seeing any like arcing or soots, carbon buildup, or cracked cap. It all looks pretty well sealed. And then I'm also looking at the rotor here for any arcing or buildup, and I don't see any debris, and it looks fairly clean inside the distributor. So we'll go ahead and pass that, as it makes no sense in buying any of this stuff unless we're really having problems with it. It is a good measure to have new parts, but in this case, we should be able to save a few bucks not having to replace any of this stuff on the ignition system. Now, as far as the condition of the water pump here, it looks fairly new as well, so we don't have to buy a new water pump for this cooling circuit. I felt the pulley here and made sure there was no play inside the pump impeller, and I mean, it all looks pretty good for the age of this vehicle. Now, also, I've bypassed the heater core, which is right here, and there's usually some long tubes here that connect that to circulate inside of the cooling system. That has been bypassed until I can get back to adding a manual valve to bypass the heater core. We'll do that sometime this winter, and I think it'll be a good time to revisit the heater core. That's going to wrap it up for the end of this video. I had a lot of fun checking over all the different systems on this Jeep, and I learned a lot actually from this Jeep working on it myself. And I think you can too, especially if you are interested in an older vehicle, older Jeep like this. They're actually pretty easy to work on, and I feel very confident and comfortable taking this Jeep to go smog. It's 35 years old, and I think it's going to pass smog flying colors. So I'll keep you guys updated. Stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for the heater core and a few other things that I have coming up in the works. But yeah, other than that, I'm really excited for my daughter and getting this Jeep reliable for her so we can take it on our adventures and camping trips and things like that. She's going to be driving here soon within the next year. We have a lot of plans for this. I want to do suspension lift for her, new wheels and tires. And I'm not going to go crazy with this build, but yeah, other than that, it's going to be our restoration build that we're working on together. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave those in the comment box below. If you guys like this content, definitely hit the like button and share it. And I'll leave all the links in the description box below if you're interested in anything that I used or parts or materials for the upgrades or modifications I did to like the cooling system and things like that. Go ahead and check that out in the description box below. But other than that, we'll see you guys on the next video where we're going to be working on the interior and exterior of this Jeep. Really excited to share that with you guys. So we'll see you on the next one. Have a good day. Peace out.